want to say many thanks to the organizers and especially UNESCO for inviting me to give a few concrete examples on the issue of integrating African history and culture into education in France on this very special day of African and Afro-descendant culture. We could speak about it for hours, and it sounds a bit difficult to summarize in a few minutes such an important topic, which shaped and forged representations about the whole continent and its inhabitants from the youngest age, and which created so many debates in a country like France. I will try to articulate my short speech around three main ideas. First, African history and culture have been for a long time a minor subject in school curricula in France. Second, things changed at the turn of the 21st century, but remained centered on history and geography. And third, since a few years, approaches have been renewed and spaces for research and innovative teachings have been created. So let me do a first, let me go back a bit into history and do a quick overview of the last decades. No need to go back to the colonization or the pre-independence era between 1945 and 1960, at a time when school curricula were reshaped in France following World War II, to understand that because of France's colonial history, African history and culture, when taught, were full of negative stereotypes. As France rebuilt its nation, several phenomena occurred and induced important changes in curricula. Secondary education generalized, and from less than 5% of an age group in 1945, 30% of the youth obtained their baccalaureate, which is the equivalent of the Ghanaian Wasi, in 1985, and it's now 80% of an age group. So new programs became necessary. At the same time, new states transitioned from colonial rule to independence. In the wake of the independence, post-colonial migration took place, and major figures, political and artistic movements led by Africans or French people of African descent appeared in the public space. The conjunction of such events created the first need for evolution. And in the 1960s, France started to integrate content dedicated to Africa, trying to promote a more balanced vision than the one previously taught at school. Historians took part in the process, including, for instance, the Burkinabe historian Joseph Kizabo in 1960, who later coordinated two volumes of the general history of Africa. In a sense, it was the first attempt to integrate the yet-to-be general history of Africa. However, it remained very marginal, incomplete, and still included a lot of stereotypes. Only a few countries, such as, for instance, South Africa or Cote d'Ivoire, were mentioned in curricula. Historical facts on pre-colonial history were very limited, as well as maps, for instance, of the continent. In the 1980s, in the last years of the Cold War, which became, as you know, which was in a number of countries, a reverse movement was observed and new stereotypes were forged. And the development, marginalization, and the idea that Africa was not the center but a periphery of the main Western and Eastern blocks. And this has been taught in schools, in junior high schools, in secondary high schools, from 1982 to 1998 in France. As you can easily imagine, generations of today's adults have grown up with these ideas. At the end of the century, things changed again, and the teaching of some parts of African history were systematized and became more accurate. especially through the role of research. For this to happen, it took memory laws to be voted at the French Parliament and implemented, which sparked intense debates in the French society on whether it is up to politicians to create and to define what needs to be taught at school, or if it was the role of the scientists. The Taubira Act of May 21st, 2001 recognized, for instance, the slave trade and slavery as crimes against humanity, and their teachings became compulsory at school in France. Even if it makes no doubt that it was a step in the right direction and encouraged both teaching and research, African issues in school books remained only linked to history and geography. On one side, dramatic history of domination from slave trade, colonization and decolonization, and on the other side, a geography of economic marginalization. There was a clear lack of positive representation, except maybe in literature. Africa was not present in teachings such as sciences, social sciences, music, architecture, and many more. So since a few years, approaches have been renewed and spaces for innovations have been created. During a speech made in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso in 2017, the French President Emmanuel Macron announced a number of initiatives aiming at changing the French-African relationships. One of these flagship initiatives was the Africa 2020 season, which eventually happened in 2021. The principal organizer of this season was the curator and academic Bonefa from Senegal. And her main objective was to change the vision and narrative on Africa through a pluridisciplinary program in arts, research, education, sciences, and many disciplines. A symbol of the season was the presentation by the chief curator herself, Monifal, of the General History of Africa 2 France and the partnership signed with UNESCO to strengthen teachings in its education programs. It followed, actually it was not the first attempt, as was recalled by Mr. Diagne at the beginning of this panel. It followed the first partnership with the French public radio RFI in 2016, where 52 programs were created and coordinated by the Congolese scientist Elika Bekoum. France, based on this partnership, developed a national plan to integrate the general history of Africa into curricula of history, languages, arts, and music, and produced with stakeholders engaged in education, teachers, content producers, publishers, and different stakeholders, tools to meet this target. And especially 50 pedagogic files to develop these new teachings. I can quote a number of initiatives taken under this framework. At kindergarten level, for instance, a toolkit was conceived around 7 contemporary artists from 7 different disciplines to develop 7 core competencies of the young kids. In primary schools, I can quote a number of initiatives too. Songs, for instance, in music from a variety of singers, such as Big Bassi from Cameroon, Nubatons from Sudan, from Morocco, or others were integrated in the curriculum. Ware, the famous Ghanaian game and West African game, are used in some school books, for instance in mathematics, to develop skills in mathematics. Fashion and design artists from the continent are also present in the school books. And even in sports, some activities were integrated, and I can mention, for instance, the Senegalese wrestling, which has been introduced into schools. In secondary schools, cinema, in partnership with the French National Center for Cinema, the CNC, has been introduced, and also in link with the Institut Française, who harbors a vast collection of 1,700 films, from which started to renovate this, digitize this important collection and make it accessible to for free to the larger number of people, including schools in France, but also abroad, and especially here in Africa. Music was introduced, there was of course a lot of teachings around music, but new styles were introduced and integrated in the curricula from different places in Africa, as well as in primary schools, sports with, for instance, the Ethiopian dance skista. Literature, again, more African writers have been introduced to the programs. Geography is now need to focus not only on marginalization, but dynamics of identities and environment matters, with a strong focus on African issues. And of course, history, medieval Africa is present in junior high school, especially junior GHS2, since 2010 in France, but teachings have been recently reinforced. In SHS1, for instance, you have teachings on Southern Africa, on the Benin Kingdom of the 17th, and from the 16th to 18th centuries, North Africa of the 19th century, the Dogon country in Mali, current Mali, from the 14th to 15th century. And in geography, you have some special focus on special African cities such as Dakar and others. And in the last year of SHS, there was a whole teaching about the democratic transitions in Africa. So all this work was, before concluding, I have to say also that in addition to these new teachings that were introduced, teachers were trained because they were not used to teach that teachings about Africa, and not only teachers, I would say, but also documentalists and people that are managing school libraries. It's really an important part of the steps that have been undertaken. So all this work was also made possible because at the same time, over revolution took place in the French society, with new initiatives such as the creation of African History and Archaeology chair at the College of France in 2019, which is a prestigious higher education and research establishment, such as I already mentioned the digitization of the cinema collections that are conserved in France. And I can also quote, for instance, the creation of the Foundation for the Memory of Slavery and Slave Trade based in Nantes, which are also non-governmental actors developing education on some particular important issues, such as, for instance, slavery. So this is quite new in France. I think it now needs to be consolidated and institutionalized, so that Africa and sciences produced, ideas produced, philosophy produced here, and social practice in Africa can be fully integrated into French curricula. It's all the more important, of course, that it's a way to consolidate, to build a nation that is integrated so many people from different cultures, and especially Afro-descendant people. Thank you.